let's give it a go. So this is being recorded. So after the fact, if people miss out on some of it, that's okay. We'll make sure to get the information to them. So hi, everybody that has a chance to join us so far. Again, I would imagine that a few more people are going to pop in. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Adam Cuppy, and I'm a recently appointed president at Learn Academy. So Chelsea and I work very closely together. Just some very brief background about who I am and kind of why I'm a part of Learn. If there was a big announcement that was listed, but I think it's important because this is the type of stuff that I'm here to be doing. So a big part of why I joined Learn was because Learn is in a huge growth opportunity, and not just bringing on new students, but also bringing on more organizations that can help ambassador one of our most important causes, and that is a better experience for less experienced people into teams. Especially over the last couple of years, what I know I've witnessed is a lot of organizations feel like their only path to success as far as hiring goes is by hiring senior people. And so you can imagine if you've got this huge pool of folks out there, that if everybody's focusing on this very narrow window of them, expectedly, wages are going to start to go way up and the pool gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and also does attrition and so forth. And I see that as kind of a real concern. And so my desire was to really help ambassador forward the idea that, well, there's another way, and we can really help support folks that varying skill levels that can come in and help teams. I also saw something else happen recently at a conference that worried me a lot. So I was at a Rails conference, huge whiteboard of jobs, and stuff was just falling off of the edges of senior positions. And then on the left-hand side, there was another board split into thirds. There was one column that said early career jobs, and it had 7 items on it, one of which said, look at the other board. And that bothered me, given that at the top of the conference, they asked the question, raise your hand if you were new, and more than half of the audience raised their hand. So I realized this, we have to do something about that. And I'm much more interested in helping that cause than anything else. And so when Chelsea and I got to talking, it was like, how can I come over and help? Because that's something I'm far more passionate about than what we were doing on the other side. So that's why I'm here. This conversation is a part of that, because what we're talking about is internships. And at Zeal, which is the company I came from, we had taken 40 different interns over the course of about 4 to 5 years, and we learned a ton. But what we learned the most of is that we were actually giving too much time and not giving enough opportunity for those folks to really experience what it was like to be a developer in the real world, right? Real world problems that they had to solve as a group. And so we thought, and actually Chantel and TJ had the idea, let's have a panel of some of the partners we've worked with that have done internships at various stages, not only as their organizations, that have gone through the different stages of growth and learning and working, not only as a company and as an organization, but with interns at different stages. And what are the things that they discovered? What sort of subtle good or better practices, what secrets can we sort of like convey to everyone else on, if you were to do an internship, what would you do? And how would you do it differently or maybe a little better, so that you can really support these people, and even more so, help your organizations to be better at supporting junior people and making your senior folk better senior folk. So that's why we're here. So to all of you, let me introduce our panel. So first, I want to introduce Bijal Hopkins from Q-Centrix. Yes, yes, DJ for the win. Yes, okay. Yes, I brought us into this room today. TJ, I swear. So okay, so we'll actually go the other direction here. And so first, I want to introduce you to Chris. Are we in the same order, TJ? Is that what's going on? So is Kristen over here? Okay. Oh my gosh, what is Zoom doing right now? Why do we even need to be in person anymore? So over there, before my finger gets cut off, right there, way over there to my far right is Kristen Mulder, right? Is that right? Mulder? No.
No.
No, none of the above.
Mulder.
Mulder.
Yeah.
Right, it's okay. You can call me from this point forward.
Like X-Files, if anyone's a fan.
Yes. Now we're getting somewhere fun. Okay. Yes. So Kristen Mulder. I just know he was Kristen. I gotta get better at names. So from Measurabl. And so, hi, Kristen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi.
To her left, who knows? Ben is sitting next to her. Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Also from Measurabl, Director of Engineering over there. Then we've got Samantha from Vizer.
Hello.
Hi, Samantha. You already know me. And then we have right here, we've got Bijal from Q-Centrix.
Hello.
Hi, Bijal. And then to the far, I don't know what direction, my leftish is Chris Petersen from Scientist. Hi, Chris. All right, awesome. And then to all of you who are out there, hello. So just so you know, if you have some questions, you're welcome to pop them into the chat, and we'll scan through those as we go along. If at the end of this, we don't have enough time to get to it, that's okay. We'll make sure that somebody on our team can reach out to you and get some questions answered or and addressed with you. All right, sounds good? Okay. Here we go. Now, I sent a handful of questions off to the panelists not too long ago, but I also said that I don't always ask the questions the same way. So, I want to keep this as organic as we possibly can, just to give the opportunity for us to really be human together. So I actually wanted to start with you, Chris, if I could, just because Scientist has gone through a lot of growth over the time that Learn has interacted with Scientists. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, did Learn start working with Scientists before it was Scientist? Like before you guys did the name change? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, we changed names 5 or 6 years ago. We were Assay Depot before Scientist.com. And yeah, we've been working with Learn for a long time. So yeah, I'm sure it was before the name change. Yeah.
So there's a long history of there. And I know that for you as a CTO, as you've got a growing team around you, you have a lot of things to think about. And one of those many things is just the internal cultural dynamics of having so many team members that are all at their different stages of growth as well, right? Even if they're classified as senior, each of us are kind of going through our different journeys. So I was curious from your perspective, looking early on, so when you started working with folks, specifically interns, versus now, because very recently, Scientists took on a bunch of interns as well. What has changed in your mind about the differences of working with interns at those early stages against working with interns now as you're really growing as an organization and your team has gotten significantly bigger?
Yeah, so the short answer is a lot. A lot has changed, right? The team has grown. We're probably 3 or 4 times bigger now than when we first started taking interns. The first set of interns we had, we probably jumped in without necessarily preparing as much as we probably should have, which I would actually encourage people, right? Don't over prepare. Don't let yourself not do something because you're afraid you haven't prepared. But I will say that we learned a lot. And things like our onboarding, our getting our application sort of installed on somebody's computer. Before we took on interns, we were usually hiring, pretty senior devs, and it was a little bit of well, come on board and we'll figure it out. And over a couple of days, we'd get Postgres installed and our caching system and all that sort of stuff, and you just kind of figure it out. If you have an intern that's going to be there for a month or 6 weeks or something like that, that's not the best way to do it, right? Like you need your documentation up to date. So that was one of the things that came quickly, came early, and the more often you get interns, the more that stays up to date. The other thing that we got as an organization out of it was, maybe oddly enough, we got mobile device management. That was one of the things that, prior to interns and prior to this sort of hiring that we've done in the last few years, we would buy people's computers and we'd give them to them and we'd set them up, and then that was it. When we started hiring, when we started getting these interns onboarded and offboarded, we really needed an automated system for that. And yeah, that was just some of the side benefits that we've had from hiring these interns. It really tightened up the company, got us ready for our security audits. Yeah.
So were there any areas, was there any additional tooling that you found that you had to do that was above and beyond what you maybe identified you should have done before? Right. So any tooling that was different because you were taking on less experienced people versus if you had an only senior team, you could have kind of stuck without it and they would have figured it out a different way? Or was it you made the discovery, you're like, no, we were really missing that and this benefits all and we should have done that in the beginning? So anything along those lines?
Yeah, it really is more the latter. I can't think of something that we're doing now that we probably shouldn't have, that we wouldn't have done before. We just, by hiring senior people, I think it allowed us to sort of cut corners, right? And by hiring more junior developers, people that are earlier in their career, it forced us to sort of think through these things, and those things help the senior developers as well. It's just they didn't. It wasn't as much of an issue before. So these are things that really tightened everything up for us as an engineering organization. They benefit everybody. So yeah, I think it's really cross-cutting, improvement.
Yeah. Bijal, I want to turn it over to you because similarly, Q-Centrix has been a partner in various forms for a long time too. And in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but Q-Centrix instituted as its kind of its own program, and maybe not its own internship program, but like its own kind of onboarding system for, bringing in folks at earlier stages. Did you experience something very similar where you had to think through that onboarding process a little differently and you kind of learned from it? Or what are the thoughts or anything along those lines came to mind there?
Yeah, I think everything that Mike mentioned, we went through all the same things. Like we had zero documentation. People would kind of just come in, figure out how to set up the app, and having interns with their limited time forced us to update all those things. We have more better instructions on how to set up app. One of the other things that we've done since is create an onboarding package too, which didn't exist before. So because interns, they're new and they get a dump of information in 3 months, but then there's so much more outside of it. So we kind of created these resources. We have a SQL cheat sheet, for example, or Git cheat sheet, for all the different technologies that we use. And what that allowed us to do too, interesting enough, we're better prepared at onboarding and hiring someone who might not be from a Rails background and comes from doing C++.
Oh, right. So you had programming cheat sheets, not just more Q-Centric specific cheat sheets. It was
right.
Yeah.
Just in general, here's how you do Ruby, right? Just kind of reinforcing starting. Because one thing with Learn Interns too that I realized, depending on the curriculum, because you switch, go through different technologies. So whatever you do month one wasn't necessarily retained by the time they came back to internships. So they kind of just needed a refresher on that. But yeah, we've gone through the exact same process. The first set of interns, we kind of just took interns and didn't know what to do. But now there's at least a little bit more planning of what team they would go on. We kind of scope out here are the potential things they can work on. So it's definitely changed.
Yeah. Asking for you, Ben and Kristen, again, Measurabl has implemented a different length of term for internship. So the standard internship for Learn is only 4 weeks, whereas Measurabl started pretty early on doing 3 months in a lot of situations. So I'm curious, between that's 3 times the length. Did you discover at all that your process earlier on in a 3-month internship would have been any different than it would have been at a shorter internship, or you just have kind of just given yourself more space to do more because you're having more time with these individuals?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we kind of fell backwards into that. So yeah, we always planned on having that time to onboard and then sort of bring the interns all the way into a team rather
Right.
than here's how you do certain things and a foreshortened schedule. So we were able to incorporate them more completely. And actually, I think barring one, we have since hired all of the interns that came in through that process.
Was that a plan from the beginning, or was that just something you stumbled into, do you think?
That was definitely not the plan from the beginning. It was something that we just
Yeah.
we lucked into. Everybody has been great and worked out um, and wanted to stay.
So imagining for a minute that, Learn's internship wasn't a part of this ever, and, Measurabl was to do it from zero on its own, right? And setting aside some of the, mechanics of sourcing folks, like where would you go find interns and so forth. What do you think, does anything come to mind that Measurabl did to help kind of foster that outcome of, creating a scenario where people can go through effectively a 3-month program and come out the other end where Measurabl feels good about hiring them? Is there anything to kind of replicate there that other companies could consider or do that might not be obvious, or maybe it is obvious? Anything come to mind?
I mean, I would echo pretty much what was said before, that building that better onboarding practice. So we went from nothing to a sheet that for every new hire, we say, like, at the end of 1 week, please update this. At the end of 2
Mhm.
weeks, at the end of a month, please fill in anything that wasn't here that you felt you needed to learn. So we started that process the same way, of just incrementally improving the onboarding process. And without interns, that would be a much rarer thing. It would be, oh, we hire one person here, one person there, so forth.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me that, like, I think about all the hiring that I've done and just hiring individuals and, developers at different skill levels and whatnot. And the onboarding process, it's kind of like it is documentation by and large, but it's kind of like documentation. It's almost never up to date. It's like never as accurate as you wished it was. So I think it's really fascinating that all three of you have mentioned how that some level of onboarding documentation has played such a significant role in making the experience for those people and also for the organization a success. So I want to actually switch to a slight focus around the more senior members of your team that are kind of, in a lot of ways, they're the ones that are bringing those folks into the fold, right? And what, if any, onboarding or documentation of sorts did you create or have to create for them so that they felt ready, that they were put in a situation where they didn't feel like it was like, I'm not ready for this, like, great, we're bringing on interns, but like, I have no idea what to do. Yeah, anything in that vein?
Yeah, we didn't actually create anything standardized like that. We did do a lot of coaching. So first we asked for people to volunteer, does anybody want to take on interns? Do you feel like you're there? And, we got a couple people there. But then for anyone who was kind of on the fence, we would bring them in and coach them how to think about breaking out your work to less complex issues, which helped a lot as well for sprint planning and things like that. So another knock-on benefit. But yeah, we basically that was our way of helping to level up seniors as well. So
Yeah. Samantha, I want to turn it over to you for a second. So as the CEO of the organization, where I would imagine that a lot of your focus is in very big picture thinking and like where some of the implementation details are kind of being pushed down to the team, and you're focusing on the future here, right? Like where are we going? How are we going to realize this vision? How do you see the role of kind of less experienced people playing a role in the team as a whole? I mean, to be very open about it, and if you would, like, where it's classified as any form of liability in your mind? Because I've heard that a lot from CEOs, like, if I've got the money, I want to spend it on the kind of surefire win. And so again, I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
But as a CEO, like, how do you negotiate that sense of risk in your mind? Like, is it a risk, or do you see it as an asset only, or like, where does your brain go with that?
Yeah, I would say it's actually quite the opposite for me personally. Like, we have a lot of junior talent on our team that we've been able to develop into senior roles across both like engineering and sales and marketing and really operations. Like, anything that we're touching, I think it's just kind of the nature of a startup organization that you're coming in and we're in a new industry and we're building a new product, and everybody's kind of in this learning curve at the same time. So having people that are really excited to learn, ironic called learn, I think is always like a great spot to be starting from. And I agree with everything that was said about having documentation and having smooth onboarding. But I also think having an onboarding as to the why behind what we're doing with the interns who are joining, and kind of like speaking to the broader intent of the product really early on, even if it's like a shorter stint that we're working on it, the why is what kind of motivates that engagement over time, I think. So that's a part of our onboarding process. And then also like kind of participatory interviewing of what are you looking to learn while you're here? And then how can we integrate that into the scope of work that we have and make sure we're giving something that's beneficial?
Yeah, I love that about asking them what are you wanting out of this? It's interesting that I was speaking with a bunch of folks that wasn't even early career folks, but they were in career transition and they were moving to a different company. And one of their great worries was the company I'm with are people I know with attitudes I know, positive and negative. Like, I feel like they know me. There's just aspects of my desire that is changing. And so I want to move on to something else. And there was this big fear around, well, what if they don't know what I want and it doesn't align? And the simple answer, my response was, well, let them know. Like, what's the thing that you are wanting to get out of it from the beginning? And I love that you brought that up, that like more proactively asking the question, like, well, what's your objective in this? But also conveying, let's hope it's not out of alignment with the why of doing it in the first place, so that we can make sure those two are working together. So that's fantastic. I really appreciate that. Any other thoughts? Kristen, any thoughts around, onboarding, or even more broadly than that, like how to bring, senior experienced folks into the fold so that they're ready as well? Because I know that for yourself, you've gone through the spectrum of things as well. I mean, you yourself were at Learn at one point in time, and now you've definitely moved on and well down your career path as well. And so I'm just curious, like from your perspective, like where does that, like what's your thoughts on that?
Sure. I love the answer of like finding out what your intern wants to work on as well. I think we have incorporated that at Measurabl. We'll ask before the internship starts if there's a particular stack they're more interested in learning, or what types of projects are they interested in. And then we do try to put them on the team that makes the most sense. So that I think is really helpful. I also think assigning them a designated mentor. I know we talked about having your seniors ready, but having like a specific senior or like a seasoned veteran at the company that they can go to for questions is really helpful, and it's especially helpful if you are remote, because you can't really see that your intern might be stuck or have a roadblock or be sitting there with a problem and they have no idea who to go to for it. So having one specific person that they know they can go to if they are stuck is really helpful. And then in that same setting too, giving them clear expectations right from the beginning. So their very first week, giving them expectations on when to ask a question. Should they, as soon as they get stuck, should they ask their mentor right away? Probably not. You probably want them to sit with their problem a little, maybe seek some answers on Stack Overflow, try a few things, and then go to their mentor. So making sure that expectation is clear at what point they should go to their mentor for help, how and when to ask the question, not just coming to the mentor and saying, it doesn't work, and leaving it. What doesn't
right.
work? Show me the error. Helping coach interns to how to ask the right questions that will benefit both the senior that is in the mentorship role and the intern.
Yeah, sitting in the problem for a minute isn't a bad thing to do. Yeah, without a doubt. I was thinking about when I was learning early on, and this was before, the concept of pair programming was even a thing in my mind. And I'm a huge advocate of pair programming in general, but like it was, and I remember just like, just sitting in front of a computer, like, why does this not work? It just worked. Like, why does this not work? And just not knowing and not knowing and not knowing. And then making the discovery was so empowering. I mean, it was just so empowering. It wasn't when it was a comma, but when it was something more significant and not just you missed the comma, friend. That was, it was such an empowering feeling. Just incredible.
Yeah, for sure. It's a sign that you're learning.
Yeah, totally.
You've learned something.
Right, exactly. And again, like when I was saying, like early on, especially working with interns, I think this is an area that the ZL, the former company I was with, was making the mistake, is that we were too available. And we didn't give the opportunity to really go through hard, challenging times. It was just too easy. And I actually think in a large part, things like Slack make it too easy for teams in general. Like it's a great way to collaborate, which is lovely, but there's something about like having pause and like creating that space to beat your head against the wall a little bit that, like you said, really creates the opportunity for learning for sure. So I want to, oh yeah, Chris, yeah.
I just wanted to second what Kristen said about, coaching people on how to ask a good question. I think it's so beneficial to everybody on the team, particularly the intern, right? They say question well asked is a question half answered. I forget some quote like that. I think that's it's a really important point. And yeah, sitting with the problem and figuring out how to ask that question can often sort of get you most of the way or all the way to the answer. So yeah, well said.
So as teams, how did you balance time commitments? So this question comes up from something in the last panel that I was on with Chris. Chris said something I thought was quite real and true. And you talked about there are just times when we just have to deliver, and we need to set that expectation properly with everybody that's involved. It's like, we just can't dedicate the time right now to more real-time mentorship. Like we're just in that mode where we just need to get to the finish line more quickly. And so we just need to be on that same page. And my sense for that is that's kind of like a general feeling of like, I'm really worried that us carving out mentorship time when time is precious is just going to be too much for us. And so how do you all balance that? Like, is there a ratio where you're like, okay, in the good times, we're focusing on like an hour a day, 2 hour days, full-time days. And then in the tough, intense times, like we set the expectation that, we're going to, pass questions over the fence, and it's going to be far more asynchronous. Like, I'm just curious, like what models have you used with your team in terms of setting expectations around how do we deal with this when the times are really tight, when we just got to focus on delivering as much as possible? Samantha, did you have your hand up there? Yeah.
Yeah, I could speak to that one. We've had different seasons. Sometimes when we take on interns and we really focus on pairing them with someone who's maybe just one level above, and then trying to train like both ways of communication. So how are you delegating well? And then also, how are you asking good questions? And then we have seasons where we're kind of in a crunch time. We need to deliver something. If we're bringing on interns, then then we know our CTO will probably be taking on the bulk of the structuring what they'll be working on and kind of like mentoring that program, because the engineers who are delivering on something are too locked in on what they're doing. So we kind of look at the thermometer of, do we have the bandwidth to bring someone in? And if we do, are they going to be working on a project with the entire team, or will they be working on almost a siloed project that's still valuable, but maybe not what we're delivering on in that season? And then there are times where we say, we don't have the bandwidth to give the best experience by hosting an internship for the next 30 days, 60 days. So it's not the time for us to do it, because if we can't be giving that like one-on-one, where do you want to go and how do we help you get there the entire time, then I don't think it's smart to set it up to start with.
Sure, it kind of sets it up to fail in a
Yeah.
way. Yeah, right. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to how you're defining the seasons? Like, is there, are there specifics in there that are kind of, flags, like this is kind of the season we're in right now? Is it kind of a sense for what's on the docket against a timeline? Is it a budgetary thing? Like, generally speaking, like, what are some of the triggers that will push you into one season or the next, past just the intuitive feeling?
Generally, always a little bit of intuition, but
Sure.
generally it relates to what we are scoping to deliver in the next 6 months. For example, where because we are a small team and everybody's kind of working on like different aspects of the same product, the key question becomes like, will the interns be working in tandem with the unit, or will they be working on a separate project? And is the separate project a priority now to manage, or is it not? So it's almost like a triage of, and I think it would be different with a larger organization and more resources, but it's a triage of what are you focusing on in your product and what's the best assignment of a team to fulfill that.
Thoughts from the rest of the panel?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've done, because we do work with sprints and do 2-week commitments, and I've realized really like no one works 8 hours or like the full 40 hours, right? That's just not realistic. And then you add in meetings, and if you have multiple meetings, like a 30-minute gap in between, like nothing's getting done in there too.
Or a panel that you're participating on a Thursday that you've been asked to do. I know, yeah. Are you getting anything done?
Things. Yeah. So one of the
Right.
things that I've done, like with interns, when we do decide to bring on interns, we kind of already have an idea of like, it's usually because one of the teams has the ability and capacity to take on interns, and then they will truly work with the entire team. So what I ask everyone, regardless of level, which right now, like I have a good balance, I would ask like everyone to spend like, just set up a one-on-one, either like 30 minutes or an hour, like dedicated time for the interns. And so then if you have a team of 4, and then you as a tech lead set up one, so like someone's meeting with them like once a day of the week, right? Which has been really good, because then you do the expectation setting, you give them their tasks, they're working through it. They ask questions as they come up, but also there's this dedicated time where they can use to do whatever. And one of the things that I've had someone do in the past, like we just had a kind of recentest new hire, I had him do like mock interview practice with the interns, which was really cool. So, but like kind of teaching the team, like, even if you just spend 30 minutes and like, if you aren't able to answer any other questions for them for the rest of the week, like that's okay. Because like when it's spread out like that, it organically provides enough one-on-one time for the interns that they need too.
I'm curious about well, there's a lot that I'm curious about, let's be fair. Like, I want to look at the different times between, like, if you were to do it all over again, right? If you were like, what are the things that you wouldn't miss? So the stuff I've heard is a good onboarding routine, right? That's one of them. Like, don't miss the onboarding routine. I'm curious a little bit about the comprehension of that, but maybe we could revisit that here in a second. But what are some other, let's talk about the things we're stealing. Like, what's the stuff that you're meeting with somebody else? Like there's another CTO, equivalent that's like, hey, I've heard you all do internships. We just don't, like, not our thing. And you're like, okay, well, time out. Think about this. What about, make sure you do these things and you're at least going to get a majority of the way there. Like, this is going to set you up for success. So what are some of those things that might not be obvious, but again, maybe they are, that it's just like, don't forget that. Like if you forget it, it becomes a little bit of a house of cards. Like, I actually want to ask the question of Measurabl real quick. So Ben and Kristen, like, in your experience, because I'm really fascinated by the fact that it's like there's been a lot of opportunity to make it work, and you've been great partners for a long time. Like, what are the things that are telling to somebody else, like, don't skip this, like, don't skip it, do it.
That's a good, tough question. I would say, yeah, the big thing would be to make sure you understand the work that you're going to be giving to the interns, that you're going to put them on. So this is something that we discuss a lot, and there's a temptation to say, oh, well, we have this grunt work, or we have these tickets that are small and nobody ever wants to put them on their roadmap, and those aren't going to be a good experience for an intern. For example, we're translating our application right now as we're looking to move into Germany and support German users. And we've got a significant portion of that done, and we have the process flowing. And someone was like, well, what if, we're getting some interns, I think, in November, and what if we just give them that work? And the engineering manager in charge of that team said, that would probably be a pretty terrible idea. Like, they wouldn't actually learn anything. They would be banging away on HTML and not actually learning anything useful. So yeah, I think the biggest thing is to identify what is work that is meaningful for them. And it's not too high level, too complex. Like, I'm not going to throw architecture problems at anybody, really, but especially an intern. And I'm not going to have them just be cleaning up HTML errors either. So somewhere in between there.
Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. We've gone through kind of a journey in how we figure out what our interns are going to do. I think when we first started, it was a little bit of a, okay, we'll onboard them like we onboard senior devs, and we'll figure out what they're going to do. That was fine, but a little haphazard. And then we went through a phase where we would sort of groom our backlog, and we would try to exactly what Ben just said. We would sort of try to identify tickets that were maybe sort of smaller in scope, and we would try to sort of spec them out. And that kind of felt a little bit waterfall-y, right? We would just try to define them better and give them, sort of throw it over the fence and have the intern work on it, because it was smaller scope, and that, mixed results, right? And then we kind of went the full other direction, and we said, all right, well, we don't want to just give them a spec and have them implement it. Let's go full pair programming. And that is, a significantly higher hit rate, right? Like, that's better, but it's not necessarily the most efficient. Now you're spending sort of 2 hours of time for every 1 hour of programming, which, is very effective, but is maybe not the best use. So where we've sort of ended up is, and this came from the team, is a little bit of a hybrid where we find some projects that are small or medium size, and then the more senior dev, we also have dedicated sort of mentors. So to whoever said that earlier, I think it was Samantha. That's Siri thinks I'm talking to her. So we also have dedicated mentors. Now we spend we have them pair up for an hour or 90 minutes, and instead of going through the full implementation of a feature, they spec out spec is probably the wrong word. they write the method definitions, right? And they talk about how it's going to work. And then you let the more junior dev go away for 4 or 5 hours, the afternoon, maybe for a day, and fill in those method definitions. Maybe you put in sentences about what the test cases should look like, and they can go and they can write those test cases. And then they come back the next day and you're using it to, you're both helping guide the person who's earlier in their career, but you're also helping to make the senior dev sort of more effective because they don't have to write all of the implementation. And that's our latest incarnation. And I think we're starting to see some good results.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So let me make sure I understood that right. So it's maybe not exactly pair programming, but you're kind of pairing up with a mentor of sorts, and they're writing basically the method signature, like this is the method, these are the types of arguments we're going to take in, and this is the sort of expectation we're going to have of this method. Mm-hmm. And so we've kind of set the expectation of work, the body of work, and then it's like, okay, now go do this. You're probably going to have questions, but you pretty mm-hmm. much know where you're going to start and where you're going to end. The stuff in the middle is what you're really working on. Is that right? Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you'll dial it up or down depending on, how, far into the internship, how far into their career they are. And what you're really trying to avoid is that pull request that a little nudge early on in the development would have made a big difference. And if you don't give that nudge, you end up with a pull request that has 150 comments, and you're going back and forth for longer than it would have taken you to write it. And it's still good. It's still work experience, but if you can avoid that with that sort of like upfront work, that's what we're trying to avoid. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never heard it. That's great. That's awesome. I love that a lot. Yeah, very cool. Samantha, anything that comes to mind like that has made this little subtleties around, don't forget this, make sure you're focusing on this, like get this in line first, because if you do that, it's going to set it up to succeed. There's some other stuff down the road, but make sure we get that. Anything come to mind now?
Yeah, I think the documentation piece that had been touched on mm-hmm. was really key. And it's the same with vendors or any role that we're bringing in. Like we want to start on day one. So like the more that we can do to get there as quick as possible, then the better we are, rather than like wasting. I think a week in a startup is like a month at a mid-sized organization and a year at a large organization. So like a week is significant. So if you're able to kind of cut your time down on the front end, I think that's super important. On the actual code base itself, I'm probably not the best person to speak to that per se, but I know my CTO has like a whole tips and tricks list that he goes through. And then the last thing I think is just again, like anybody who's coming to work on the project, whether it's a day or a week or a month or a year or more, really speaking as to why we're doing it and just taking the time, whether it's like an hour. Like I like to talk to everybody personally, thank them, explain what we're doing. Even if I'm not working day in and day out on the code, I still like having those conversations and being accessible.
Wonderful.
Kristen,
Bijal, please.
I was just gonna say, I do that is something we do with our interns and our new hires in general as part of onboarding. They get to meet our product team as well, and they get a rundown of like, here's what we're building and like here's how users use it, and they do like an actual walkthrough of the different pages and areas of the app, which I think it's really good for them to meet people outside of engineering in general too, and like really see it from users' perspective that way, which I think it gets missed when it's just like when you're diving straight into the code base.
Yeah, how many of your teams do that, where they kind of expose maybe not just interns, but I mean just your team to all the aspects of the company? Is that a pretty standard practice across the board for you all? Like, yeah.
Yeah,
So
we
how
have.
much? Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, we actually break that out into the different stacks that we have and have people walk through. Here's the front end. Here's the back end. We have a middle tier that is mostly authentication layer. We even have, I don't know if we're doing live ones, but I know we have good recordings of sales demos of the app as well. So here's everything the app does as told by a salesperson to a prospective client. So that helps any new engineer see, oh, what is the user actually experiencing?
That's great. For your other teams, how many of the other companies there do you guys have like recorded walkthroughs of that? Is that a pretty standard practice for you all as well, or more of a manual, like let's sit down and walk through it together sort of deal?
A little bit of a hybrid. We do every 6 to 12 months. I'll do the full demo for whoever is relatively new and record it for whoever needs it in the future. It changes frequently enough that you need to do it every 6 months or so.
Yeah.
We do it every 2 weeks. We do like a team wide, and even if interns, like they'll come on and we'll kind of walk through like, hey, here's what happened in the last 2 weeks. These are the applications of the product. These are the groups and organizations that are joining it, and just trying to make it as tangible as possible. It's like 30 minutes on a Friday morning, but I'll just pop up, share any like news, exciting updates, answer any questions that come up, so people know there's like a space to have that conversation. And then it ends up having less like side conversations if they're all kind of like reserved in that space, and it happens frequently enough.
Yeah. Kristen, anything you wanted to add to like kind of what's happening in terms of good unknowns, like don't forget this. I mean, especially having been on both sides of it so recently. I mean, recently by comparison, like anything that you recall as when you were in that seat of kind of early learner, kind of like, oh man, that was something that was so valuable to me that, you know, most would probably take for granted. Like they just didn't realize that it's actually super helpful.
Yeah, I think the videos of walking through the product is really important. And we also have a hybrid too for the actual code base itself. So I got to participate in a walkthrough with several devs of each repo. And I think we have that now in our onboarding process. You get assigned like a meeting with a dev who works often in the repo, and then you go through, they'll take you through and walk you through real time, you know, the different classes. And and so I think that was super helpful. And then I also had a high level architecture walkthrough that I found really helpful, and I got to ask a lot of questions there. And so I liked that one was live, because it essentially looked at every tool and thing that we could possibly use, and it was really high level. And the person that did it just walked through every single piece of it and how that all comes together to make the app work. So yeah, I really appreciated all of those. And then this one is separate, but I still think it's a good idea if you can. I know not all companies can take on multiple people at once as interns, but I do think if you can take on a cohort, that's really helpful, because then they can also rely on each other to learn when they're stuck. And then for you as the person that wants to improve the internship process, it can be helpful, because if all of your interns are stuck on this one thing, you know that that's a gap in your onboarding process. You've missed something, so you can kind of take note of that and improve it for the next round.
That, yes, so true, right? Like if everyone gets stuck here, it's probably not them, right? Right, totally. But you made another point there just a second ago that we've witnessed time and time again, which is, you know, when you and clarify when you say cohort, like how many individuals you're referring to, because in Learn terminology, cohort is a class of 20. So
right.
Right.
Ours
so I
is
don't think
much
we're
smaller.
talking about that.
3.
Yeah.
3.
Yeah. Totally.
Good point.
Yeah. So we witnessed a very similar thing that at least starting with a pair. So start with 2, because then they can lean on one another. is a really powerful thing for for them, but also to help make sure that they're, well, yeah, just simply that they're able to kind of have that camaraderie between one another and be effective even in the times in which you can't dedicate a whole lot of mentorship time to them. Well, we've got a handful of minutes left, and there's been a couple of questions that were asked, and Mina popped one in here that I'm curious if any of you have had either have thoughts or any experience with it. And specifically, the question is, she's curious to know if there are any prior experiences with adapting internship programs that have primarily been targeting computer science university graduates. Any experience around that in this panel here?
I would say, like, with that one, I think we've had the opposite experience. So our first set of interns, they were learned graduates, and we took them interns. And that's what it was like for a while, because we would get interns from Learn and DBC, so coming out of boot camp. At some point, we did get interns who were from computer science background, just right out of college, and it was interesting because we had figured out somewhat of an onboarding process for interns, and then the first time we got a college graduate, they are brand spanking new out of college, versus like anyone who came from boot camp had some form of like career change, so had a different professional experience ahead of time. And we realized someone who came from college, like, we had to teach them like simple things like check your email, like here's your calendar, right. Like if there's a meeting, like, right, this is where you'll see it and what time it is and stuff like that. So it was for I imagine, right, like, so it was, yeah, like I said, the opposite, right? Like we had to actually think about like what to teach, how to coach and mentor someone who's just right out of college versus like from a boot camp a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point. A statistic I had heard from, I think it's a 2016 statistic, was as far as boot camp graduates are concerned, the average age is 29 and a half. And the average amount of prior professional experience was 7 years, which makes a lot of sense. That generally speaking, a lot of boot camp grads are career transitioners more than they are, in the path of direct learning out of high school and college. Yeah. Adding to her question, because I was asking the first of the parts of the question, and the next aspect of the questions were just how were equity around recruitment and operations, the concerns around that being addressed. So what is your company's philosophy around recruiting for your internship program to ensure that the talent isn't being exploited? And maybe she could provide, Mina, if you have a chance, even more context to some of that, if there's a scenario there. But, as Learn is concerned, I think that we have been incredibly lucky that we have an incredibly diverse grouping of folks on almost all spectrums, right? Whether it's, ethnicities or skill levels, prior skill levels, career paths, you name it. Like it's one of the most beautiful things about career transition, like programs such as Learn or other boot camps, or, you get a lot of different people in it, which is way cool. So it feels like one of the benefits that companies can get out of that is that you're just automatically participating and you're interacting with folks that are just naturally going to be across many different spectrums in that way. But let's set that aside for a minute. Any other experiences that you've all had recruiting folks, whether lesser experience or interns, and how you've done that recruitment process so that you can make sure that there's a strong sense of equitability, that that you're bringing in a good diverse group of folks, and not just pulling from the already privileged, if that makes sense. Any thoughts around that, or prior experiences or things you witnessed?
I can speak to that.
Yeah, please.
I think what's cool about the Learn process, at least the times that I've been involved really heavily with it in the past, is you come on a Zoom call and there was maybe 30 or 40, maybe less than that, but dozens of people that were in the cohort that were looking to be placed in an internship. And I had the opportunity to explain, like, here's what the product does. These are the kinds of tasks that we're going to be looking for. these are the types of things you would be working on day to day, for example. Is that interesting? Does anybody have any questions? And then there was like a 10-minute period for me to answer questions about it. So I remember in the last time that I did so, I was really focused on somebody who had interest in design. I do a lot of our product. And we had some like interesting like UX kind of things that were going on. So I was able to mention that. And then that kind of like sub-cohorted the group, I think, based on interest level as to who was interested in the kinds of things that we were working on. And then they were able to engage, ask questions, ended up applying, and then meeting with our CTO, and then kind of going through the process from there. But I think it was a cool way to say, like, this is what we're doing specifically to a wide group of people. And then whoever was attracted to that, we could kind of engage in conversation and move forward based on shared interest, which I thought was very cool.
Yeah, very cool. Any other thoughts there? Yeah, one of the things you said, Samantha, that I think is, you've said this a couple of different times, and I really applaud it because I think it's so important, which is to not forget that these people have their own desires and drives and interests. And if we kind of can tap into that passion and that excitement, then it's to everybody's benefit, because we can amplify that within that person by giving them something practical to work on that aligns with that desire. And at the same time is we can get this kind of free asset. The free asset is that passion, right? It's like this kind of added benefit of I'm actually interested in this type of work. Because at times it definitely feels like, Mina said this, like, how not to exploit these folks is, and there was another mention there that I would call, kind of sweeping the floor, right? Like, well, let's give these junior people all the things we don't want to do, and we'll just work on the things we love doing. And it's a broken thing for everybody. One, there's not a natural segmentation between the work, for starters. Like, what defines sweeping those tasks, right? That doesn't make any sense. And then second to that is like, why is that okay? I'm not quite sure. Like, it doesn't give them a good sense of, it doesn't tap into passions. It doesn't give them a good sense of what they can work on and learn from or any of that stuff. It's just the things you don't want to do. So why would they want to do it? While at the same time, I've also found that, and I think, Chris, the suggestion you made about, pairing up to define the method definition and then kind of giving space for them to work on the implementation in the middle is kind of an interesting example of sort of the hybrid of two things, where it's like there's some architectural choices that are going to get made, and then there's implementation there in the middle that in certain scenarios, to a more experienced person, it's like, it's a little bit by rote. Like, I'm going to do this, especially in a Rails application, I'm going to do this kind of the same way over and over again. But to somebody who's new that hasn't done it over and over and over again, like, this is a great exercise. This is a great set of reps to put in. So it's like striking that balance between what is a quality thing for somebody that's new to it to work on versus something that is just grunt work. Is I don't know that it's a fine line, but it's one to very much consider all the time, for sure. Well, we are at time, and I want to thank our panelists. Kristen, I'm so sorry I screwed up your last name, but it's Mulder is what it is. And you're now known as X-Files Kristen in my mind, forever and ever. Amen. Ben, thank you so much. Samantha, thank you so much. Bijal, thank you. And of course, Chris, thank you as well. I'm really glad that you have been able to participate in this. And I know and hope that we're going to have plenty of opportunities in the future. For all of you that are watching or listening now, if you have more questions, our team is very much available. We're trying to build out as much of the support system as we can to help make it more accessible for you all to bring on interns and even junior folks, hire them directly into your company. So if any of this resonates for you, if you want more clarity, just know that the Learn team is happy to help in whatever capacity that is so that we can make it more accessible. Like I said, we're here to evangelize the cause more than anything, not just be selfish about it. So, okay. Well, thank you so much again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. We can't leave without a perfect soundtrack, of course. So we're going to see where we're at. What is the odds of that?
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.